Chapter 13. Nightfall and First Strike. Night came like a falling weight. Not sudden but inevitable. The last thin light along the ridges snuffed out as dust and smoke thickened into a blanket. The outpost's floodlights burned their last white arcs, searching for movement that had already melted back into the dark. Men moved like shadows in the light. Every motion rehearsed into muscle. Every command stripped down to necessity. Check the line, load the feed, hold the channel. Captain Reeve rode the command platform like a captain on a listing ship. From up here he could see the world in slices. The wire, the outer trench, the ridges bathed in failing light. The flicker of silhouettes that were not quite animals and not quite machine. He watched them line up. Low, patient, an ocean of blacked carapaces cresting the skyline. The sensor grid had warned them, but warnings are thin things when the ground starts moving under the feet of the enemy. "Sound off," Reeve said into his throat mic. The line below replied, "Weapons hot, turrets manned, charges armed, med bay standing by." The voices were stripped of everything that wasn't duty. Only the radio pockets hummed. The rest of the world held its breath. Mara moved along the grated walkway beside him with the efficiency of a woman who slept in 5-minute bursts. She had 3 feeds open on her wrist: thermal sweeps, seismic spikes, and the last patchwork image from a drone whose lens had been peppered with grit. She handed him the holo. "They're moving in layers," she said. "Outer scouts first, then the heavier ones. They tested our lights earlier to map crossfire zones. Now they'll try to banish the light and come in blind. In packs." Reeve watched the holo. The little red pings thickened on the screen, then bled into one another like a stain. "We hold the wire until they hit it. Let them chew the outer ring. When they commit, we seal them into the kill zone and burn the field." "That means we give up some perimeter," Mara said. "We can't stop them all, not with what's left." "Then we give them what we can pay for in blood," Reeve said. "We buy time." He met her gaze. "We buy until dawn, until relief hits. Nothing else." Lennox came up on the ladder behind them, mask pulled back, eyes hollow, but something like a grin wrenched into place. "So we die slow or die fast?" he asked, voice equal parts bravado and bone-deep tiredness. "We don't die at all," Reeve said, too sharply, and the words were more command than comfort. The first wave arrived like a storm hitting a cliff. It began with the earth, a deep, animal groan that ran through metal plates and teeth, followed by the thunder of bodies. The floodlights caught them as they rose over the ridge, 6 legs working like pistons, plates overlapping like shingled stone, mouths working wet and hungry. They were not one thing, but battalions, runners at the front, brutes in the center, something like commanders probing with slow, bright sensors on their foreheads. The first impact against the outer wire was a physics problem writ in living muscle. The creatures didn't rush so much as batter and press, a long, sustained pressure intended to find a seam. Turrets opened up in a disciplined arc, belts of tracer tracing their path, rounds smacking against chitin and sometimes punching through to stop smaller forms. The outer charges went off at Reeve's count, puking flame and dirt into the attackers. Bodies flew. For a breath, a thin, holy breath, fire and geometry held them back. Then they adapted. Where previous assaults had been simple rushes, this night's movers worked with staggered timing. Some drew fire, some burrowed at the soft edge of a scorch mark. Others used the confusion of concussive blasts to rout beneath the lip of the trench. The sand and rock shifted. A trench heaved as something heavy tried to lever itself up. The ground surrendered in a spray of dirt and dark ichor. A creature clambered out inside the trench, snapped a gunner in two with a strike that made nothing dramatic of the human body, and then there was a hole in the line. "Secondary wire down!" someone screamed. "South sector, breach!" Reeve didn't pause. He barked orders that spliced the chaos into discipline. "Bring the inner heaters online. Pull the men from the east bracket inward. Lennox with me, we seal the gap now." Lennox was already moving, a lithe shadow among the flailing, the world reduced to his breath and the iron taste in his mouth. They ran along the catwalk, boots slipping in grit, sparks scattered from shredded cable. The tracer light painted the dark world in lines that cut through flesh and shell alike. They hit the trench as two creatures tried to heave a shattered gate up. Lennox shot first, steady, and the muzzle blast rang off the metal. The creature flinched and roared, talons scraping a fresh gouge in the plating. Reeve stepped in, planted his shoulder, and unloaded a magazine into the soft joint below the carapace. The thing collapsed with a noise like a fallen tree, convulsing. "No time to look pretty," Lennox panted, handing his barrel to another man. "Fix the breach." He drove a thermite charge against the bent lip. Mara's voice came in his ear. "Burn the lip. Let the heat bake the sand. Make it uninhabitable." They detonated the charge. The fire licked and pulled like a tongue, glassing the sand into black. Screams from beyond cut through the night, the noise of bodies and the mechanical shrieks of dying carapaces. Where the glass formed was a no man's place, a place of temporary advantage cut into the earth. Inside the inner ring, the world became close and tactile. The creatures were not stupid. They used bodies as shields. They forced the men into choke points and hammered at those seams. One of the turrets seized. Servo motors howled and then froze. The men in the scribbled gun pit scattered like meat. Reeve ran through a corridor bristling with smoke, metal, and the smell of ozone. He heard Mara's voice. "Hold the corridor! Don't cluster! Fall back in pairs!" The creatures worked in pairs sometimes, one to pull, one to rip. In a narrow passageway near the communications room, a younger soldier, Tull, tried to start a fallback when a creature swung through, jaws opening like a doorway. Tull didn't die quick. The creature kept him alive, like some grotesque instrument. It pinned him, then used him as a battering ram against the next door. Reeve watched, hands shaking, and then he shot the thing point blank, the bullet spitting through viscera and chitin. Tull slid down the wall, and they dragged him to a med station that was overfull and smelling of disinfectant and burnt flesh. The med bay became a stanza of horrors and miracles, one crowded with hands. Mara herded the injured into triage with an efficiency that was almost cruel. She held an IV to a man's arm with hairline fractures, and then slapped a tourniquet hard into place with hands that did not tremble until the work stopped. The lights there flickered under load, each flicker a countdown. At one point, a heavy creature levered itself against the outer plating like some monstrous battering ram. The support gave with a shriek, and a block of the wall slid inward like a door. A man fell with it. Reeve dove, grabbed a grating, and heaved with everything he had. Around him, others did the same. They saved a life by inches. But every inch bought cost. Every saved man took fuel and bullets and time. They rotated through hell like a machine. An hour felt like a day. The ground under their boots changed from gritty to slick to sticky with the dark glassing from the thermite strikes. The creatures adapted, and then adapted again. When the men dropped a tripwire field and rigged a flare burst, the attackers started snatching the flares before they hit the ground, catching flame and using the brief light to silhouette themselves for the others. At one point, Reeve found himself face to face with a juvenile, smaller, leaner, its carapace not yet fully cemented into armor. It moved with terrifying quickness, a blur of claws that caught the light. He didn't have time to aim. He braced and the thing struck, leaving a half-stitched rag of fabric across his forearm and a pain that made the world stand still. He hit it with a single, focused shot to a weak spot it exposed when it nested its head too far. It collapsed in a tangle of limbs. Reeve tasted salt on his tongue, not the taste of loss, but the burn of adrenaline. He looked up and found Mara there, breathing hard, face streaked with soot. "You good?" she shouted. "As good as you can be," he said. "We don't get good," she said. "We get going." Midnight folded into a darker hour and then into the early drag of the morning. The assault didn't ease, it mutated. One team used cover to swarm a generator mast, then android-like in their coordination, though they were flesh. They levered it and dropped it, sending a shower of sparks across a section of the wire. It left a black flank, a bite into the world where silence moved like a knife. At one point, Reeve heard a voice through the comm with a tone like glass breaking. "Command, East Tower compromised. Repeat, East Tower compromised." "Seal the corridor," he ordered. "Set the charges. Get people out." He saw Lennox through the smoke, moving like a man possessed, dragging a wounded corporal as the creature's talons tried to find purchase on the metal. Lennox shouldered the man like a sack and hauled him through the smoke. He passed Reeve and caught his eye for one breath, that raw, impossible grin. 2 seconds later, he was gone into a corridor that thundered with the stomping of a beast. They were losing people. They were losing sections. They were buying inches and hours, and the chance of a dawn that might mean extraction. One by one, the turrets went silent as their power reserves stuttered. The emergency generators burned with a ragged cough, and the floodlights sank to a thinner, more guttering light. The creatures shifted tactics again. Those that could crawl moved to press their advantage, slipping through blacked corridors and using the heat of men to mask movement. They were good at killing, but excellent at problem-solving. They lifted collapsed beams to create crawl spaces. They understood how to use debris as ramparts. There was a moment, small, absurd, where Lennox and Reeve found themselves back-to-back in a corridor that smelled of burnt copper. They were both breathing hard, hands raw with work, heartbeats loud in their ears. A creature pushed at the end of the corridor, probing. Reeve fired a controlled burst, and the muzzle flare painted the metal for an instant. Lennox laughed then, short and soldier-bright, a laugh torn out of a trapped chest. "Thought you said we don't die, Captain." Lennox's voice was a rasp. "I said we don't die yet," Reeve shot back. "Hold the line." Lennox's grin was something like worship. He slammed a fresh magazine home. "Aye, hold the line." They did. For a while, the corridor was their world, and they defended it like it mattered alone. But the scope of the strike revealed itself with cruel honesty. The attackers began to work the perimeter as a unit, pressure in one place, then another, probing and stretching the defenders until they found a seam. The seam appeared at dawn's furthest edge, an old maintenance lift, half jammed and corroded. When the creatures breached it, they didn't come alone. They came with an armored weight that knocked men like toys. It ripped through a parapet, and the world crashed in a noise of metal and screaming. Reeve felt the world tilt. He saw friends fall into the scramble, and he smelled the burning of something that had once been a life support vent. He felt the time slip through his fingers like warm sand. They retreated, blood on hands and faces, into a tighter ring of steel and concrete. They made barricade after barricade, welded doors, set last resort explosives. They conserved ammunition and cursed the lack of it. For every creature they stopped, 2 more would adjust and return. As the first gray of a false dawn began to silver the edges of the horizon, a lull dropped over the field. The creatures withdrew like tide going out, and the valley filled with the ragged, raw sound of survivors counting and checking. Men moved like shadows between twisted metal and broken guns, calling names off lists like prayer. They hauled the wounded into the med bay, and then, when that was full, into corners and under tarps. The air tasted of wire and burnt flesh. Reeve walked through the wreckage with a kind of slow, terrible recognition. The outer wire was shredded in 2 places outright, and charred glass coated the ground where thermite had met sand. The trench had 3 breaches. The east tower lay like a hulking rib cage. Some men were screaming into their helmets. Others were staring at nothing at all. Mara found Reeve near the north gate, leaning against cold metal, breath ragged. "Status?" he asked. "Perimeter's broken in 2 sectors," she said. "We're on the inner ring. 10 survivors, including us, but 2 are critically wounded. We don't have enough mags for another sustained push." She swallowed. They learned. They adjusted. They've got coordination. This wasn't just an attack. It was an operation. Reeve let the words sink. The light bled pale over the world. The survivors were exhausted to the bone. Their faces were maps of everything scorched and lost. "Everybody ready for what we do next?" Reeve asked. His voice was dry. Mara met his eye. "We hold the inner. We conserve our ammo. And we pray the relief sees the beacon when it comes." "You sure?" Lennox said, catching up with them, his face black with soot and grief. "Because I'm not sure about a lot. But I am sure about this. I'd rather die with you lot than disappear into the dark alone." Reeve nodded. "Then we hold." They made their last preparations with a quiet born of necessity. Tripwires set like teeth in a trap. Last reserves of ammo divided like contraband. Incendiaries placed to seal corridors if needed. The night had taken its pound of flesh and then demanded more. The outpost, for all its blood and smoke, still stood like a thing with a pulse. It rode the thin line between ruin and survival. At the edge of the compound, the alien bodies smoked in clumps where grenades and thermite had turned chitin into glass. The survivors counted and counted again, then rubbed their hands with oil and tried to rest for a breath that never came. Reeve looked out toward the ridges as the sky started to strip to gray. Through the haze, shapes still moved, a jigsaw shifting beyond the light. The assault had taught them something terrible. The creatures could change, learn, coordinate, and retool. They knew how to use the landscape like a weapon. He felt the weight of a decision in his chest. To hold and hope command could get a ship down, or to gamble everything on a counterstrike that might not clear the field. He closed his fist and then opened it. The decision sat there like iron. They had 1 hour left. Less if the attackers decided to stop being patient. Reeve walked back into the outpost. He passed Mara and Lennox, and for a second they did not have to say anything. The nod they shared was a pact. For dawn, for one more stand, for the hope that the sky would answer them when the time came. Night opened its mouth and swallowed the compound whole. The survivors pulled their hoods up and watched the dark breathe. Somewhere far above, a distant planet orbiter tracked across the black. Down below, the creatures rearranged themselves like an army, waiting for the last, relentless hour. There is always a story to be told out here in the frontier, as long as there is someone to listen, like, and subscribe, and join us again for more.